I am Jim Collison and live from our virtual studios kind of around the world. This is Gallup's Called the Coach, recorded on August 12th, 2020. Called the Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. And I must say, at this time, it's never been more important. If you're listening live, join us in the chat room. We'd love to have you there. Check in and let us know where you're listening from. If you're listening after the fact and you have questions about anything, really, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget, if you're on YouTube, you can subscribe right below the video window there. And of course, you can listen to us as a podcast. Search Gallup Webcast from any podcast app. Dr. Adam Hickman is our host today. Adam's Gallup's content manager. And Adam, that sounds super important. Welcome to Called the Coach.
Thanks, Jim. Great to be back. Good to see you. I love we color coordinated our efforts on shirts.
Yeah, that's good.
Out today.
We have a special guest today. Why don't you take a second to introduce her?
Yes, so welcome Gallup's Director of U.S. Social Research, Lydia Saad. She's with us today to talk through a little bit about why social research and how it intersects with coaching. And she comes today with achiever, strategic, responsibility, input, and learner. And I could say over the last year of seeing Lydia's work, partnering with her having to deal with my emails and conversations, 100% agree. I think you're going to hear it, see it, and come to fruition on all of her top 5 today. So Lydia, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so as similar to what Jim had mentioned, Director's U.S. Social Research is a little intimidating, I will admit, as I was writing it out. What is your role? What do you do at Gallup?
So all that really means is that of the wonderful team that we have, and we all do a lot of the same teams, that I'm ultimately responsible for the questions that we ask on the U.S. Gallup poll, as well as the content that we produce using that data, most of which gets reported on the Gallup news site, which is news.gallup.com, which we'll talk more about later, and then some direct to social media stuff. But that's what it means.
Got it. Okay, cool. And the key word there, news.gallup.com. We will come back to that one. But if you want to see some of the, I would say, beautiful work that our news team produces and Lydia's a part of a lot, that's the first site to see. And we're going to hopefully get you some articles out there today that's most relevant that's faced right now. But social research, right? We can put them together. We've got an idea of what it means. But why does social research matter right now?
Well, so social research means basically all the data we collect in the U.S. Gallup poll on U.S. society. We also have social research in the world poll, but because I'm U.S. research, we'll talk about that. It's how people live their lives. It runs the gamut from their views on politics to domestic policy issues, but also their behavior. We have long-term trends on people's diet, smoking, drinking, exercise, how religious they are. On abortion, we cover everything from, on social issues. I always think abortion to Z, A to Z. We cover everything run the gamut on social issues. And these are all things that people, these views, these behaviors, they're things that people carry around with them. We don't live in compartments. So all the things people think about, feel, do, are who they bring to the table when a coach sits down to meet with them and talk about their strengths. So I think just the more familiarity coaches have with the range of behaviors and attitudes in the American public, I think that brings a lot of perspective to those conversations.
Sure. And I love the idea of and I have a high analytical. Those who don't have analytical, you're with me on this. It doesn't need a percent sign. Words are data. Right. And so what you guys are bringing to fruition is what are the words, the things, the feelings, the pieces to it, and what does that translate into the social research that we have going on right now? And dare I say, the most pressing issues that a lot of individuals are thinking about. I'll give an example more so towards the end of, if I'm a coach, how do I pull this all together? But here's probably the one thing that I know, if you talk Gallup outside of Gallup to people, like my neighbor, right? If I say, hey, you know what Gallup is? And they're like, you mean the polling company? Like, yes, that's a part of it. That's not the whole thing. But that sometimes if you know, if you don't know, then we'll get you there. But how far does this go back? How long have we been doing Gallup or social research of the sort?
Well, it's really, this goes back to the founding of the company by George Gallup in 1935.
Okay.
Back then it was called the American Institute of Public Opinion. So right from the get-go, he had his view on public opinion. And it was public opinion about what? It was things going on in society. One of the first um, news stories that we have in our archives from, I think it's 35 or 36, is American support for child labor laws. And there's
Okay.
a picture of a little dirty boy with coal on his face in a coal mine or a factory or something, and it was, public support for child labor laws to protect children from having to work. And so we've been going strong ever since then with whatever the issues of the day are. Gallup has been there to measure what Americans think about the policies, and some of those questions we've continued to trend, and other things have evolved over time as policy issues have evolved.
Awesome. Since 1935, it's probably been a while.
Yes.
um, is there anywhere we can go and see some of the stuff that's back then, like to the vault of things? Anywhere, if someone's curious, I always love. I have one book back here that's sort of what questions were asked and what were the answers. And anytime we have people over, the conversation's getting stale. I'm always like, let me go grab that book because let's talk about what was going on in the past, because I'll just turn right to nerd mode on it. But where could you find any of that if people are curious about where were we, what were we thinking about at that point to pull things forward?
Well, so the news.gallup website, what we call Gallup News, is a great place. There are some places of the site that are kind of systematic. You can go in and see everything we've asked on a topic. And right now, we don't make it super easy. The site's going to be revamped in the fall, so hang on. But right now, if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the website, you'll see something that says Topics A to Z, and you click on
Yeah.
that, and you will see everything from abortion to yaks or whatever it is.
Mhm.
And you can click on that and see all the questions we asked with the full trend as far back as they go. So that's one thing. Then we have another special type of story that we call the Gallup Vault, and we've published well over 100 now, where we take a deep dive into the past, find a very interesting question we might have asked in the 30s, 40s, 50s, or 60s. We revisit those results, and if possible, the actual news story that we published at the time, go back and kind of quote from those news articles. What was Dr. Gallup saying at the time
Yeah.
about this data?
Perfect. Yeah, there it is too. And no, I mean, we use this as employees just as anybody else, as coaches could use them. I know when we start to think about workplace issues and trends, very similar site I jump onto, and this is where we find this. So if you're thinking of as a coach so far, it's like, well, this is interesting. What do I do with it? Well, just think of the stories, the coaching sessions you've had recently. What topics have they brought up that has a society influence, or potentially they're a leader that could affect a change in their own company that they would like to know? What's the voice of the US population thinking, right? And even sometimes, I know you're director of US, but it doesn't just stop there. Is that right, Lydia? Is there global things on the site as well?
Yes, very much so, and
Okay.
more so up until COVID. Since COVID, a lot of our world polling had to stop until we could transfer the in-person data collection to telephone. But yes, there's a ton of stuff out there from our world poll, which is a great resource. It's the only worldwide representative poll of what people in over 120, 130 countries are thinking. And these are representative country polls. They're not just going into cities, which a lot of other kind of global surveys do. And they cover all the same topics we cover. So that data is there also.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So a lot there. Easy to say.
Yes. And it's
Um,
actually, there's a tag on the website that says
yeah, there it is.
world. Yep.
Yeah,
So that's a good place
and
to
I
start.
and I love the tiles of these, because if you're a researcher, you go to the abstract, right, to find out, am I going to get in the media article? If you look at the title will get you, but underneath there, look look for I always look for the names. So I'm looking for Megan Breen, I'm looking for Lydia and Jeff Jones. Those are my three. I'm just giving away my tricks. But also the quick synopsis, right, will get you close to what's involved with that article as well. And I mean, just the niceness to this is that it's there for you to download, it's there for you to utilize, and it's always the most relevant topic. You guys do a fantastic job at this. And speaking of, right? Our most recent commitment that we've made, so our Center on Black Voices, if you're not familiar with it, there is a site, Jim, maybe we could throw that up. But what it is it's a 100-year commitment to report the Black experience in America. And if you think of social research, where can we, yeah, there we go, there it is. Where can we bring the Gallup brand and thought process things that we do around here? That will be an ongoing commitment. Lydia, is there anything more you want to add to that, or kind of what makes that unique and special for us?
So Gallup has a long history of measuring American attitudes about race relations and civil rights, going back to the 50s. And we have maintained those trends all along. And as best as possible, we will periodically have oversamples of Black Americans and Hispanic Americans so we can report on their views on those things. So this is just like a supercharged version of that. We're going to be doing more with those Gallup trends. We're going to be doing bigger and more often oversampling of Black Americans so we can make sure to represent their views on things. But then we're also going to be going in new directions with the discoveries we've had around criminal justice and police and other things that have been in the American news recently, to go deep dives on some stuff. We could have a whole workplace poll focused on racial equity. We're going to have special focus just on police. So it's going to be just go broader and deeper than we've ever gone before, but building on stuff that Gallup has had a commitment to for more than half a century.
Awesome. Yeah, so little input on the workplace side of things. So congratulations to those that have pulled that together. That'll be a long commitment, but for the right reasons and right causes. Perfect. So we can't get out of COVID conversations, right? If we're going to talk, let's talk a little bit about what that's involved, but also how social research has come into this, and then how do we use it as coaches as well. Our chief scientist, Jim Harder, has got it ingrained in my head. March 15th is kind of the date we've used all on when things went upside down on COVID and where it all starts. So let's say since March 15th, right, we've watched over COVID very closely. Lydia and I are on frequent calls throughout the week on what are the questions that are being asked, what's coming on, what's coming off, what's the sense of what's it look like. If you've read our workplace articles, you'll see panel data involved with that. That's as a result of Lydia and crew and team as well. But what we're trying to do is pull those into, while it might be a panel conversation and a question asked, we're working those in because we know that has an implication on workplace. So Lydia, from your perspective, what's the most prolific research finding we've made since that, or what's one that comes to your mind? And then we'll see how this translates over into coaching.
Gosh, that's always hard to put one. I'm maximizer, so it's very hard for me to, that's like right below my top fives, and I find that one causes me the most trouble. But let me just answer that a little bit differently. We've covered a whole bunch of different buckets in this topic. And then, you think about planning ahead for polling. This is planning, polling on a pandemic was not something we had, scheduled. And so, when this all happened, we just started asking questions left and right, thinking, what's going on today? How worried are people about this? How likely do they think they're going to get it? How long do they think this is going to be disruptive? And then as it went on, and social distancing suddenly became important. We started asking people, how often are you doing this? Are you staying home? And got very granular, asking the American public about their social distancing behaviors. And then when it became clear that people were being sent home from work and this was going to be very disruptive and this would be very relevant to workplace, we started asking people about their concerns about their finances, their mental well-being, their physical well-being, how long they could go with social distancing before their finances, their health would be harmed by this. And we started asking people how they're working. Are they going into their workplace? Are they working remotely? How has that changed for them? And then, of course, we got into the whole education aspect as kids were going from the classroom to Zoom. So we quickly came on board with all of these different categories of measures. And we've had to stay one step ahead to think, where is this going and what do we ask now that will be a baseline for how this is going to change going forward? we weren't asking about masks initially because we were told not to wear masks. And as soon as masks became important, we've been tracking masks. Asking about masks in the workplace. Do people feel, that makes them safe? So it's all important. I can't pick one.
I know. I love this. And can you hear Achiever Strategic come just pouring out of you? So let's keep your Achiever on point here. I love this one that Jim's pulled up here. Can you talk us through what is this site and what was the idea to it? Why do we do it? I know I've brought this up in weeks. I think this is the easiest format for us on a workplace side of finding out what we own, what we have, because we've got a lot of data, and knowing how to find it and where to find it in the moment that you need it sometimes is a challenge, but you've made it easy. So can you talk us through what this is?
Yes, this is really a companion document to something that we also have on our front page, which is called the Gallup COVID Roundup blog, where about once a week, we're a little bit flexible with when we do it. We do a summary of all the major findings from all the news stories we've published in the prior time period. But as we did that, we tried to put a little summary of every single article in that blog. So if someone wants the quick read on everything we found, you can go through that. But then we also took out the links to the individual stories that we've been tracking and created this companion document sorted by topic. So if you just want to, if you want to know, what's the first thing we found about, masks, you can go to the social distancing category and look through that. Or if you want to know Americans' views on their kids' schooling, you can keep scrolling down to the kids section and you'll see everything we have on that. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Adults, but here, children's well-being. It's under that section. So I know it's helpful to me to have things cataloged. I don't know if that's a strength, but I like things lined up. So
did maybe you felt the responsibility to make sure it's categorized correctly?
That might have been it.
And the input of knowing where to go get it. Secretly, the site's for Lydia. So
That's my brain on paper, but it works for me, and it's apparently been useful for a lot of people. So
awesome. Yes. So there's that site. The Roundup site's always great. Let's keep talking COVID stuff more. So if you're thinking of, how do you make sense of, leading through disruption here, things that are out there, there's articles associated with it, but even that page that we were just on, if you're stepping into a conversation where, an executive or manager or whoever it is that you're coaching has some curiosity about anything related to these topics, or you've seen, I was saying to Lydia yesterday, if you've studied athletes, one of the things they do is they're in the game in the moment, even before the game starts. They kind of ran the plays each and every time in their head to know what that is. I hope as coaches or whatever the role that you're in, you kind of do the same thing. You're in the conversation before the conversation happens. And a part of that pre-work is stepping into their world. So if you see on LinkedIn or whatever platform or however you're able to click into their world for a minute and find out, they're a leader, but they're talking about social distancing the most. Well, what's the latest perspective that's going on related to social distancing? Well, you could turn to many different media outlets, but you could also turn right to the site. Not only does that give you the perspective, and we're going to share a little bit of depth on how do we get to this, how do we get these numbers and that, but then also you're the expert. You could send the article ahead of time. You could have the conversation and say, everything we've talked about on social distancing today and through our coaching session, I'll leave you a link for it. You don't have to click on it. You can go into it if you want to. You can click in it, and it kind of pushes you in front to say, I've done my homework, I've done my research, it's credible, it's trustworthy, it's valuable, and here it is. So again, if you're thinking, how do you integrate this into your coaching conversations? It's a part of the pre-work, but it's also a part of the post-work as well. You've worked it into your conversations and pre or post, whatever the case may be, you've put that into your coaching conversation, which just elevates your expertise of this specific topic. Okay, so let's pick on a specific topic. It's almost September here in the state below Michigan. That's how I refer to the state, because I happen to be a Michigan fan. So school's going to start. If I'm a parent or I'm going to coach a parent, how could I utilize social research, or what would come up that we've done recently that relates to parenting or parents?
So, kids in the U.S. Were pulled out of school in March and sent home, and schools scrambled, and within the next month, kids were mostly online. So we started tracking, asking parents. We were curious, how quickly are kids going to get back to education? What's it going to look like? So first, we were just measuring what are kids doing for schooling, and then that obviously has a very close connection to what are parents doing at home, because without school, the parents had to do a lot more backfill to keep their kids going on reading or whatever, and workbooks. And then once school started, they had a lot of issues getting those kids up on running on Zoom. So we've done a lot of measurement of it, but at a certain point, toward the end of the school year, we took a reading of how parents were feeling about the next school year. Do you want your child to go back full time? Do you want them a blended approach, or do you want them to do completely remote learning? Very interesting that at that point, a majority of parents were ready for their kids to go back to school. We knew from other data that there were a lot of stressors at home with the child emotionally and educationally to keep them going on online remote learning. Parents are ready for them to go back. But flash forward to July, we now have that 56 who wanted their kids to go back full time has dropped to 36. So in that time, obviously the infection rate in the US has gotten a lot worse. Parents have a lot more concerns about safety going back. We now have 28% saying they want their children to do full-time distance learning, up from 7%. So parents have made a big shift in their mindset about their child's schooling, and we know it has a big impact on their home life and their remote work life as well.
Yeah. Yep. And I think every parent in US, global, whatever the case may be, is had that feeling of, what do we do? And no, no research to back this. I think the higher percent was, I've had enough of summer. When they just go back to school, and then it got closer, and it's like, well, I don't know if I really want to send them just yet. And it's cool to see how the data turns out from that. But if you think of coaching as well, you're going to coach parents, right? And if you know they're active parents, if you know their parents, just the idea of like, gosh, yeah, I don't know what we're thinking about doing for school or for kids coming up. Elevate yourself as the expert, know what the science and research behind that says, to say, well, yeah, I hear what you mean. Did you know, recent Gallup research has kind of really uncovered, and then drop in the data point to where that's at, right? Just changes the conversation a little bit, but also puts them at ease to say, okay, I'm not too far off. This is what I was thinking. This kind of confirms it along the way too. Let's keep going on that same notion around that. Are there other articles or topics that you would say are COVID related that we should be keeping eyes on, or other any other research that has come out recently that's interesting that you would see would be relevant or useful for coaches right now?
So we just started asking questions about whether people would take a vaccine.
Okay.
So we found 2/3 saying, if there were a vaccine available that was FDA approved and ready tomorrow, would you take it? And it was free. About 2/3 said yes, and about 1/3 said no. We will be doing follow-up to find out why not. But interesting thing is that rate was the same for employees, people who work, versus those who don't. So there will be issues with going back to work. If people think that a vaccine is going to be just a silver bullet, it's not necessarily. If that vaccine isn't, doesn't have a very high effectiveness rate, and we don't have a very high percentage of Americans taking it, we may not get to that herd immunity. So I think it's, if people are saying to you, well, when we take the vaccine and we get back to work, everything's going to be great. I don't know, maybe there's a point in that conversation to say, that's the hope, but right now this is where the American public is, and it doesn't look like it's going to be that quick a process. Just one example, face mask usage. We've been starting to get into a little more granular on how Americans are using it. Large percent report that they're almost always or usually wearing a face mask in indoor settings when they cannot be physically separate from other people. But relatively small percentage, less than half, saying they always use a face mask in those situations outdoors. And So again, it's a little reality check on how soon America will get this under control if people are not using the protection that may be necessary to slow or stop the virus. It just,
Mhm.
we'll see what happens, but it's an interesting conversation starter or fact to weave in there if you're talking
Yeah,
about people's assumptions about getting back to normal. Those are the things that are going to factor into that.
great. As Jim's showing this, there's one thing I want to make mention of. You could read a lot, right? I mean, just there's so much that you're hit with on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. I mean, all of it. There's a ton of data that's out there. One thing I hope that if you're listening and you're able to check out articles, there's such a narrative, logical flow to how we write and what we write. So if you're thinking, do I need to get in this and spend 10 minutes? No. Could you? Of course you could. You can spend as long as you want on there, right? But we've got a word count and a time on page count that we try to anchor really quick. And on the workplace side of things, you probably see more of a narrative. Lydia, anything you'd like to say about that piece on how we write what we write so people can get what they need and get out?
Yeah, so we kind of have a outline where we typically will write. Our story will be based around a table, a trend or a table right up at the top, and that will have the key
Mm-hmm.
information. And we'll have just a very short introduction that just uh, gets right into the data. And we usually have story highlights up right above that give you the key points in the whole story, if that's all you can read. But we try to hit you with the main point at the beginning, and then the rest of the article might be elaborating on that, might be breaking it
Okay.
out by a certain demographic or going a little deeper on the trend. But as Adam said, it's your choice. If you just want a 2-minute read, you can just read the highlights and the lead paragraph and look at that graph,
Yeah.
and you'll get what you need.
And most important is what we're going to next. I've got some quick round questions for you. If you see at the bottom of those articles, I don't know if Jim, you can throw that one back up. There's a gray box there that's got the plus sign. If you click on that, it gives you the method. In shortest fashion, Lydia, what is that box?
Survey methods. Well, this is kind of a required disclaimer or transparency that we need to provide for surveys. Just tells people what the survey dates are, what the sample size is, what the margin of error is around the numbers, and a little bit more about how the data was weighted, what demographic characteristics we made sure balance out to match census data so that we know our samples are representative. There's a lot more that could be put in here, but this is kind of the minimum that we need to put out to give people assurance that these are valid numbers that can be projected to the population that we're reporting on, which is usually national adults.
Great. Yeah, is there, I know the sample you guys it's always impressive when I see the numbers. That's what makes me most excited and comfortable using it, because it's not a representation of 10, right? It's thousands. Is that pretty much the norm? Are we trending right around the thousands?
Well, so the Gallup panel has been the vehicle, excuse me, for most of our COVID research, and that has the benefit of really big numbers, which are great, especially when you want to do subgroups. But our typical Gallup poll is a national adult sample of 1,000, and that is because it's done in a scientific way. It's very reliable with a margin of error ±3 or ±4. So once this is a little side note, but Dr. Gallup used to say you could almost just poll 100 people if you do it right, and that's all you would need. And it's true. We used to do pilot surveys. If we had new questions, we'd just do a quick pilot survey to see how they're working, get the bugs out. We would do 50 to 70 interviews. And if you do them correctly, randomly, we would pretty much get the same result when we did 1,000.
Yeah,
So don't get too hung
that's
up on
cool.
numbers. Numbers are great when you want to do subgroups, but
You
if
got
you have
high
a Gallup
competition.
poll, of 1,000, competition, I know.
I like thousands, big numbers.
Adam, I will say, is Lydia was going through these and I'm in the background showing them. I didn't know in advance where you guys were going, so I was having to find them on the fly. And so I was a little bit behind, but you could see how fast I was bringing these in and up and showing them without any prior. I didn't have the links prior. In this case, with some of the other ones I did, but in this case I didn't. So that page is really, really valuable. The page we were talking about before, if you're thinking about finding things. I just searched by, you mentioned parents. I knew that was down towards the bottom, so I scrolled down to find that in the link. So a great way to quickly find it. Now, Lydia, at one point you said, hey, Americans felt this way at the beginning of the summer about kids going back to school. Just 45 days later, they're already changing their mind, right? And so that news can change very, very quickly. So, of course, this is also nice. The farther you go back in time, you get a little bit of a snapshot of the way people felt then, but maybe compare that to now. So also be careful as you're searching through. Make sure, especially during this COVID situation, you know you're watching dates on the posts of these, because we may have more current data that's more accurate.
Yep, and we got the dates there, as you can see, next to each link, and the most recent are at the top. So make sure
it's a great resource.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right, Adam, go through the lightning round.
Okay, so here we go, Lydia. Quick as you can. How do we pick topics to study?
Well, it depends on the topic, but there's kind of two ways. One is we are an old organization that has trends, and so a lot of times the topics pick themselves because we cycle through those on a routine basis, and it's time to ask confidence institutions at the end of June or beginning of July. That gets on the survey, and we got a lot of that. But then otherwise, it's picking up what's in the news, and we try to be right on point. At the same time, we have a standard that we don't want to do what we call spot news. We're not going to just ask questions on things that are not going to be important a year from now or 10 years from now. We try to ask find the enduring aspect of an issue and measure that. And so a lot goes into it, but we have a great team. We meet regularly. We meet daily, actually, to discuss what's in the news, what we need to poll on.
Cool.
Yeah.
So there's a pulse constantly.
Yes.
I know on Mohammed's the Gallup podcast, he says at the end that you can pitch ideas. Is that still true? How do we do that? If a coach wants to pitch an idea, how do you do that?
Yeah, I just email us.
Okay.
There's a contact Gallup on the website, and anything that's related to Gallup News gets routed to us, and we love suggestions. People will, we'll take all those comments seriously. We don't get a lot of them, so we take the ones we do get really seriously, and they get discussed and sometimes put right on.
I mark down, start emailing. I'll start throwing ideas. Cool. If somebody wanted to do social research in a certain area, can they hire Gallup to do this? Is that something we do?
Yeah, so that's called our public release department. And so they would go through a different door than what I do. We're caretakers of the Gallup poll and all that, but there's a whole division of Gallup that will first. We have very specific criteria for what kinds of research we do and who we will do it for. We don't work for candidates or political parties or advocacy organizations. And we don't do research that's trying to make a certain point or affect policy. But if it's an approved topic by an approved sponsor, then people can hire us to work with them to do a telephone poll, a panel poll, a mail poll, whatever the right methodology would be. Get that data either for their own use that would not be public, or it could be something they say, we want this to be a public release survey, and be able to go out there and report it in the news.
What goes into a study?
Doing it? You mean all the steps?
I love it. Yeah. You're like, are you kidding? You have to answer that question. Just if you're thinking of as we get set for, like, what goes into it? What's the team? We got a good question in the chat room around there's COVID, there's election things going on. How do we keep up with demand? Then we add in this other entity of other things possible. How do we keep up with it? What goes all into it?
Well, I appreciate it. It has been very busy juggling all these things. And again, being a maximizer, there are many more stories we think we'd like to write on each of these topics that sometimes we can get to, but we are, doing our best to get out the most important stuff we can, and bringing in more people to write about it. It's been a great problem to have, that there is so much important data, and we've been fortunate enough to collect it. So we've kept up for the most part, but we're all working, I would say, many more hours this year than a normal year. Yeah. COVID has been had a different effect on us than other places.
Sure. From an outsider's perspective, so Lydia and I are on the same team, but we obviously work in different divisions. And I get to see snapshots of the news team and the things that they're keeping on, and they are literally around the clock. Sometimes it's always like, I'm always like, well, my competition gets in, I'm like, gosh, how do I compete with that? I can't compete with that. There's only one, I'm only one here. But yeah, so that's always, that's what I see happening. I love this next question because there's so much rooted in what do you read anymore? And it circulates around the trustworthy, what's credible. So how does Gallup social research, how do you keep it credible and trustworthy?
Well, we view ourselves as a traditional news organization. We are pollsters, but we're also journalists of kind of the old school, where you don't interject your point of view. You don't you verify every fact 3 times before you report it, and we don't want to create opinion. We don't want to influence policy. We want to reflect what the American people think and report it objectively. And we all feel that way to our core. And so we all strive for that. And then we keep each other honest because we have a very aggressive peer review process where we all review everything each other does, including our questionnaires. It'd be very easy to slip in the wrong word on a questionnaire and bias a question. So if that happens inadvertently, it gets scrubbed out long before it gets onto the phones.
Yeah, if you're familiar with our Q12, one of the questions around mission and purpose, that's probably the best mission and purpose answer I've just heard about what's at our core, because that's what keeps driving us forward every day. You mentioned a little bit about this, but what are the items or topics or research items we won't report on or about?
Topics we won't report on. I can't think of a topic we won't report on. That's not true. We stay away from like celebrity gossip. We stay away from, sometimes the ins and outs of what's happening. It's, for instance, when Brett Kavanaugh was nominated as the Supreme Court nominee, we have trend questions on people's favorable or unfavorable opinion of the nominee. We have questions on whether someone should be confirmed or not confirmed. We have questions on view of the Supreme Court. We chose not to get into the weeds on the he said, she said questions. What do you believe? The kind of tabloid aspect of it, although very important questions at the time. There are a lot of other pollsters doing that. We have limited resources. We felt our role was to provide the historical perspective on how does this nominee stack up against all the other 20 nominees behind him that we've measured support on. Is he more or less supported by the American people? So that's kind of an example of the boundaries we have. So yes, I guess there are things we don't ask, and it just has to do with avoiding that the salacious and the all of that, and but providing the core information that's needed in this case. And in that case, he was the least popular Supreme Court nominee that we had ever measured. And so that information we put out there. And
got it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Two more. What makes you most proud to report the news that we do?
In addition to what I just said about our standards, I think it's our methodology that both our panel and our telephone, the gray box. Thank you. Yeah. That's a lot of care goes into doing everything correctly, and that there's other firms that are still fighting this good fight to do it well. But I'm very confident that we have the gold standard on these things, so that makes me very confident in what we report.
Awesome. Okay, I feel like we could team up on this question. I felt like I was interviewing for a role here in a minute. So Lydia, you're hired again. Great answers. We'll get a hold of you. Why would a coach, in your perspective, so I mean, you have influence into the coaching network, and we're kind of showing how and why that is today, but it's not your full-time job. But if on the street I stopped and said, hey, Lydia, why would a coach want to pay attention to any of these findings? How do you answer that question?
I'm going to give you a really strange answer to this.
Yes.
And I'm not sure
Okay.
it's direct, but I think it applies. One time
Okay.
I was interviewed, I was called for jury duty, and I sat in the room where everyone sits, and then I was called to come in and talk to the lawyers and answer their questions and see if they wanted me for a jury. And they started asking me stuff, and they asked me what I did, and I was talking about the Gallup poll, and subjects came up, and they said to me, "You're not like a normal person. Because you know stuff, you know a lot of stuff, like you just know what's going on in the world. A lot of people have no idea what's going on in the world. It's not because I read a newspaper, it's because I understand public opinion, and I
Sure.
understand where Americans are on so many things. It just gives you a completely different, it levels you up so much in understanding every person you talk to, because
Mhm.
there's a good chance you understand where they're coming from, because you know where the public stands on things, and you know where men and women stand on things, and people in different regions of the country. And so I just think the more these coaches understand the breadth of public opinion, that they're going to just find ways, it's going to be just seep through what they do and just make them not a normal person, make them a much
Yeah.
level up in terms of what they bring to a conversation.
Adam, you said this a couple times, make him the smartest person in the room, right?
Right.
From that perspective. Lydia, we also asked one, and I'll add this to the lightning round. John had asked, how do you address the challenge of underrepresentation of subgroups that are in your surveys? How do we make sure we're getting a complete, and it's part of the science, but how do we
Yes.
ensure that happens?
So with telephone surveys, it's done through weighting, and weighting, like not weighting, but WEIGHTING, is the process where at the end of the survey we look at the sample we got and we say how many out of 1,000 are men and women, or in each of these age buckets, or in each of these race buckets, and how close does that match census? And if it's off, there's a process to weight the individual respondents to try to maximize the representation of the whole study. And it works very well on telephone polls, because telephone polls, even though we have lower response rates now, are still very good at getting a random sample of the public. So those estimates are not too far off. And especially now with cell phones, with everyone holding, the means that we need to reach them in their pocket, and we're up to 70% cell phones on our surveys. We're getting a lot more young people, we're getting a lot more minorities, we're getting a lot more people that normally move around, lower income people that oftentimes didn't have a landline or changed households. So we're actually getting really good samples, and we don't have to do a lot of that. But the panel surveys are different. And that involves doing oversamples, like intentionally taking our panel of all Americans and oversampling the younger ones, because we might not have as many of them in our big group. Same for male. If you're doing a male survey, you got to send more letters out to certain types of people than others to get the numbers back that you need. So it depends on the mode.
I'm going to throw up Gallup.com here, particularly news.gallup.com. And I think, Adam, as we think about the best way, and Lydia, the best way to connect with us, this may be the page you bookmark, right? So if you go to news.gallup.com, and you can see this information. In fact, I think the roundup that we were talking about is right there on the front page, right? And so you can head over there and get the roundup page available to you there. And then we talked, I showed this one a little bit earlier, as well as all the links that are associated are out there as well. So it's a great way to stay connected that way. Would you add any other resources, Lydia, as we think about other places people should go?
Well, like I said, that A to Z on the bottom, I would just show that one more time and show on the homepage how to find it. Actually, if you go right to the homepage, I think it's also now linked at the top left. I don't think you have to scroll all the way to the bottom.
Let's bring that back.
Let's see if I'm correct on that.
Give me a second here. So you say it's all the way to the left?
Right there. Explore trends, right there.
Right there.
Right there.
Yep. And it'll take you to it. My internet connection's a little slow, but there we go.
Yeah, and you can see, I mean, there's airlines, alcohol, business and industry sector ratings, children, crime, all sorts of things.
Work and workplace. I gotta plug that one.
Yes, and I do want to say something about work. Gallup, that we do polling on Americans' satisfaction with their job overall and in specific elements, and public support for labor unions and some other aspects of work. But in terms of U.S. social research, we stay a bit away from going too deep on workplace because Gallup has a whole workplace division that Adam could talk more about that does a whole lot of research on workplace issues. So there'd be another website to go for that.
After you visit news.
Yes.
Then go to workplace.
I think there was also a question about Gallup trends a little bit earlier. So at the bottom of that page, we do have some access here to historical Gallup trends. And it goes a little bit deeper than what's available on our website as well. Of course, you can contact us for that. Some of that research is paid research that you can get access to through us. Adam, any other final things we want to cover as we kind of bring this in for landing?
Yeah, Lydia's courtroom story's a good story, because I was thinking of what's the home run answer I would be aiming for when I asked, why would we pay attention as a coach to this? There's a lot of things you've got to worry about, a lot of things you've got to think into it. So just adding this more to it, what's the difference? Well, here's a quick scenario for you. You're about to coach an executive that lives in the northeast part of the United States. They've got children. One of them's going to U of M, which is a great choice. Maybe one's in middle school and a niece is in elementary school. And their company's struggling with remote working. That's kind of the input you have going into it. Just that much input alone, if you think of, well, how do I get prepared? I was going to say the game because my competition never shuts off. So how do you get ready for the game, right? How do you get ready for that quarter? You turn and you look at the news items that are out there on the topics to say, what can I find out going on in the Northeast U.S.? What can I find out about college and education? You said that's a topic that's in that top trends. Elementary school, wonder what's going on with children, things that are related to that. Struggling with remote working, there's probably some workplace pieces I could tie into that as well. So if you think of the day it's sitting there for you, and again, elevate yourself to the expert in the room, you can start that conversation there. You can have preloaded articles, things that you can send out ahead of time. You can send them out afterwards. That just helps you build your credibility, but also expertise in that conversation to know. You've just heard all of the rigor that goes into social research that we have here at Gallup. Why not use it? It's out there for you. So courtroom or not, it's great you guys do what you do, and thank you for being a part of that. Lydia,
would you add anything to that? Just we can't let Adam off that early or that easy. Would you add anything to that as well in that courtroom case?
Oh God, they didn't pick me for the jury, so
me neither. I never get picked.
Yeah, and neither one wanted me, so the judge got rid of me because neither one wanted to use their exemption or whatever to get rid of me because they knew the other didn't want me. So, but I just think it might be a little bit hard. I mean, Adam's given some really vivid examples of how you might work this in, but I think that just spend some time with the website, go to what interests you, and it'll stick, and then I think it'll be more evident how you can use it in your conversations when you become familiar with the material. That's
okay. All right.
That's what I'd say.
Sounds good. I think you can send an email to inquiries.gallup.com. You can also send us, if you can't remember that, and that's a hard word to spell, especially for me, just remember coaching. That's easy for me to spell. Send an email to coaching@gallup.com. We have folks available 24/7 monitoring those email addresses, and we'll send your questions to the right person. I get actually a couple of those a day now from you, and so we appreciate your questions. If you want to maybe you're part of a larger organization or a large university and you want to partner with us in some way, contact us. And we love kind of to start that conversation. Of course, Adam, anything else before I close it?
No, I think that's it. There's just so much that goes into this. I hope everyone can take away and get used to it. If you get stuck in the weeds and you can't find it out, can't find what you need or where you need to go, use me as a resource as well.
Yeah, sounds good. I've actually learned a lot today. I mean, I'm on Gallup.com quite a bit, and I hadn't seen the A to Z page. And so a great resource now to go out and find those things. I often find, Lydia, I spend a lot of time on the coaching side. So Gallup.com/CliftonStrengths, finding those articles for folks. But now on the news side, I know I got a one-up, and it makes me look smart. So that's even though I'm not. We want to remind everyone to take full advantages of all the resources we have available. I mentioned that Gallup.com/CliftonStrengths on the Clifton Strengths side, Gallup.com or news.gallup.com for anything that we talked about today. And you can head out there today and get access to that. If you want to listen to us as a podcast, just search Gallup Webcasts. That'll actually, and we mentioned this, Muhammad Yunus is our host for the Gallup podcast, and this would be a great way to tie in with us. Very quick podcast, almost weekly, available for you. It's just called, we got super creative, the Gallup podcast. You can find that or anywhere podcasts are found in the apps on your phone there or on the web, anywhere. You can find Called to Coach, same spot. Just search Gallup Webcasts as well. On YouTube, track us down just by finding CliftonStrengths. If you want to send us that email, send it to coaching@gallup.com. Find us on Eventbrite so you know when these things are coming up, gallup.eventbrite.com. And of course, you can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/group/calledtocoach. If you're not a Facebooker, and maybe it's better if you're not these days, but if you're not, you can find us on LinkedIn, search CliftonStrengths Trained Coaches, and I'll let you in that group as well. I want to thank you for joining us today. If you found this helpful, and coaches, you should have found this helpful, share it. Just take this, let folks know, send the link out, say, you should probably listen to this. We appreciate those shares as well. I want to thank you for joining us today. Don't forget, if you're listening live, Theme Thursday tomorrow, come out and join us for that as well. Thanks for joining us today. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.